The next area is our edge detection. Let's start to go over the shader itself. The first two parameters here are edge and silhouette. And those are the main toon shader toon line attribute parameters there. So edge, you can think of it as interior lines of all our objects, and silhouette being the outline of all our objects. And that'll become a little bit more apparent down the line once we start adding textures and stuff. If silhouette is turned off, then the edge parameters will have influence over everything. So I'm just going to close the silhouette tab for a second there. And let's start to go into our edge parameters here. So we can go ahead and change the color, and we can just click on that and just give it a nice color, and you can see it'll immediately have influence on our toon lines there. A better way to change the color is to click this little arrow to the left, and it'll drop down those similar parameters here. And now when we change these, we'll have a live feedback in our scene there, so you can just get your colors a lot faster and quicker. The next window is our tone mapping. We'll go over that in a little bit. Underneath that is our opacity, and that's basically how transparent those toon lines are, all the way to 0 there. The next one is our width scale. So as I turn this down, our toon lines get thinner and thinner, but still remain completely opaque. Underneath that is the edge detection, and this is telling the toon shader where to draw the lines. The first one is our ID difference, and so this is telling it to draw lines between every object that is unique. So in this case, like, all these objects are not merged together, so they all have a unique ID, and so it's drawing a toon line throughout all that. So when I turn this off, you can see now we're getting an outline around just the silhouette of the shader sort of conglomerate. So I'm just going to turn that back on because we want all those nice interior lines to get details. The shader difference we're going to ignore for now. The mask color, let's ignore for now, but we will start to plug textures into here to get more of the interior detail lines. UV threshold. If your object has UVs where the UV borders are, so like the outline of the UV shell itself, this will start to draw toon lines around where those UV shell edges are. So you can see when I turn that up, we're starting to get toon lines around where those splits are. So I usually keep that at 0 because a lot of my objects don't have UVs built for that, and it's better to just use it through the textures instead. So the next big one is the angle threshold, and this is basically telling where to draw the lines based on a Fresnel effect. So right now it's defaulted at 180 degrees, so it's basically just drawing the very silhouette of the object, and anything past 180 degrees it'll draw, which means nothing because it's going 180 around both sides. So once we start to bring this down to 90 degrees, this will be the very edge of our cylinders and spheres. And once we start to pull it back a little bit, we'll want to bring it up a little bit shorter. So you can see now that our angle threshold is getting to be virtually 0, we're starting to add more toon lines around our objects there. And once we start to get a little bit more complex objects in our scene, this will have a big impact of where the toon lines are actually getting drawn. So for this guy, I usually like to keep it around 15 degrees. It seems to have the best influence of where to draw the lines on our objects while not creating these awkward, blobby, sort of not well-defined lines. But also has enough detail for our objects there. The next one is what normals have influence on it. I always just keep it at the shading normal. It has like the best interaction with it. And then advanced edge control, we can just keep those all at default. The next drop down is our silhouette tab here. And let's enable that. So you can see right away, we're starting to get influence of that. And you can see we have our edge parameters with that lime green color, and it's only showing up in the interior and our silhouette. Let's quickly just change it to like a bright purple. So you can see now our silhouette of all our objects are getting that purple outline, while our interior are getting the green outline. So the way these two work together is the silhouette, its width scale is sort of the thickest that the edge can be. So the edge parameter always has to be equal to or smaller than the silhouette width. So you can see as I turn down the silhouette width scale, it's actually shrinking everything. But as I turn down the main edge width scale, it's only shrinking the interior lines. So you can see how these interactions work with each other. Opacity doesn't have an influence over that. So you can see now we're getting our interior lines back. Or our interior lines remain, but our silhouette is now completely transparent. So a lot of times I'll usually have my silhouette just like a little bit thicker than my interior lines, and it just helps to sort of give the outline of our assets a little bit more just boldness. But for now, I'm going to crank everything back up to 1. Now let's dive into our base color channel here. And this is sort of like the diffuse or base color or anything like that that you have used. So it has 3 parameters here: weight, color, and tone map. The weight is just sort of how much influence it has over the scene. It defaults at 0.8, but let's just crank it up to 1 so it has full influence. The color is predictive as well, so it just kind of adds color into our scene. I'm just going to keep it at white for now, because what we want to do is start to influence the color through our tone map. So with our tone mapping, this is sort of the area where we can have influence over our shadow color. We can like clamp the sort of shadow fall off so it's nice and cell shaded, and just have total influence over all the colors on our objects. So to do that, let's go into the top left of our editor here, and let's type in ramp into the search bar. And that'll find us our ramp_RBG, and we can just left click drag that out. And so now we have a new node in our graph here. So let's attach it to our toon shader material here with the output sort of like swatch there, and we can click and drag and release this line on the top left of our toon shader node there in the blue square, and this is sort of like a global input for the shader, and when we let go we'll get this new drop down which will lead us to all of our parameters that's in that material. So you can see we have our edge, color, tone map, opacity, all our silhouette ones, and then down the line. What we want to do is plug it into our base tone map. And so by default, nothing will change, but if we do move anything, you can see it'll go completely black. So what we want to do is change the type at the very top here from custom to just U, and that just sort of allows it to work correctly. You could basically choose anything except for custom, but I usually just drop it down to U, just so I know that it's always consistent. So you can see here we have this ramp area, and this is the gradient that sort of takes in this gray to black information and adjusts it based on all the colors and stuff that we do in this little window here. So right now you can see that this is sort of like a 50% gray kind of thing, and then it kind of goes from 50% gray to black. So what we want to do is let's just drag this yellow knot to the left to somewhere about like 50%. I think it's like a little bit narrower than that, but you can see now we're starting to adjust it to be from like the white to black there. And so now let's just take our black node and let's give it a color. So now you can see we're starting to change the colors in our scene and sort of like customize the colors like the way we want to have them there. So I'm just going to choose like a red and a yellow just to change the colors from our toon lines there. And you can see now this is a little bit more powerful than just trying to change it with the color, because this just keeps everything with like the black shadows. So the reason why we want to keep our color here to white is because the tone map gets multiplied onto this color channel. So if I say I'll change this thing to be blue, it's multiplying those warm colors on the blue, and it's just making everything dark, and it's not predictive. So if we keep this at white, we can have direct influence over the colors we want through this gradient here, and the colors will be accurate to the ones we choose. So let's make it nice and cel shaded. In the interpolation tab here, let's make sure we're clicking our red guy, and let's change it from smooth to step. And you can see right away it makes everything red, because now red has a 100% influence all the way up to our yellow. So let's just drag the yellow back until we're starting to bring it into our scene. So you can see now we're starting to get a little bit of that cel shaded look back in our scene. We can now create intermediate points. You can see when I'm like hovering down here, we get this little ghost outline of one of those knots. If I just left click, it'll create a new knot there. And it sort of grabs the interpolation from the one to the left, so it's already set up to be a step. So let's just give that like sort of a middle color there, and you can see now we're starting to get that nice sort of cel shaded, clean shadow feel to our objects there. We can sort of just keep adding in points. And so you can see I added this one past the yellow, which we didn't change to step, and now it's, you can see we're getting that a little bit of that gradient back. So let's just go into smooth and let's change it back to step. So now we have sort of like a nice transition from like our shadow color all the way to a little bit of a highlight in our scene. So this works the same way with our edge and silhouette tone mapping. So let's kind of duplicate here with the Control C, Control V, and I'll paste in a new ramp node. And let's grab the output of that, drop it on the blue input area, and let's add it to our edge tone map. And you can see now we have a new parameter added to there. And let's just add it to the silhouette tone map as well. So in our base shader here, let's change the colors to white so they have no influence and aren't multiplying colors we don't want to have. And let's change that to white as well. So you can see by default, it's not following this same gradient. For some reason, the tone mapping for our edges are flipped and they're on the other side of our ramp. So let's just sort of slide everything up here. And I'm just going to take out a bunch of these and just have a shadow and a highlight color there. Let's change this to be a blue so we can really see it. I'm going to change this back to that lime green color. So you can see now we're starting to get our outlines to be influenced by the shadows as well. So now we're getting like the highlighted, the lit area to be this green color and our shadowed area to be this blue color. And we can kind of do the same thing with like having the intermediate points, but it kind of works less so. So I don't really worry about that. And down the line, we will sort of influence this in a better way to have our outlines to be sort of have influence globally, so we can change, when we change our colors, they'll have automatically change our tune lines.
All right, now that we have our scene set up for using Arnold's Toon shaders, in the next lesson, let's go into making our base shader for the rest of our scene.